Hello there, this is Dimitris Christou, and this time around I'll be building the image I've created for the BlenderDiplom challenge, and I've decided to build a video tutorial for it. It's a very interesting file since it uses at about 12 modifiers, and it'll be pretty interesting to see how the scene is put together. So let's begin. I'll be using the default cube, and I'll hit 7 on my main keypad to switch to top perspective and 5 to switch to top overview, and I'll hit Z and grab my cube and move it at -8 for X and Y. Okay, and you can see where it is, and I'll also hit 1 on my main keypad to switch to front overview, and I'll also move my cube down at -8 for the Z axis as well, so I'll hit Z and Z and move it down. You can see at the bottom left corner here, and I'm moving it for -8 units along the global Z axis. Okay, now I'll begin adding my modifiers. I'll move to the modifiers panel and click add modifier, and I'll add an array. Now this is our first array, and I'll just increase the count from 2, and I'll hit 7 on my main keypad for you to see, and I'll change the count from 2 to 9. Okay, I'll collapse this one and add another array modifier, and this time around I'll change the relative offset value. The one on the top is the X. I'll set it to 0. I'll use the relative value of 1 for the X axis here, and for this one I'll set the Y axis to 1, so you can see our clones are now moving on the Y axis, and I'll increase the count again to 9. Okay, so you can see what we got here, and I'll just add another array modifier, and for this one I'll also change the relative offset here. I'll set the X, the default value, from 1 to 0, and set the Z value here from 0 to 1, and I'll also increase the count from 2 to 9. Okay, I'll also delete the default lamp here, right click and select delete. Now back to our cube and at the modifiers panel, and I'll now add a build modifier, and we've seen the build modifier before. It takes 100 frames to build the mesh here, so I'll move some frames up here. I'll set it to 60, and I'll also click randomize. So you can see how our arrays look now when the build modifier is applied, and I'll also bring this one down. Okay, so moving on, I'll add another array here, add modifier and generate array, and for this one I'll leave the relative offset to 1, and the good thing is that the array is now applied to the entire object, and I'll increase the count again to 9. Okay, so you see what we got here. I'll hit 7 on my main keypad, switch to top overview, and I'll add another modifier, and this time we'll add a simple deform modifier, and I'm going to change it from twist to bend, excuse me, and I'll just increase the deform factor here from 0.35 to 4.5, and you see how the bend deform here bends our entire array here. Looks pretty interesting, you can see it. And again another modifier here, and I'll add another build modifier, and I'm adding the build modifier just so I get a nice result. We have faces taken out by the mesh using the build modifier, and I think it creates a varied and interesting result for my mesh here. So for this build modifier, again I'll click randomize, I'll select randomize, and I'll change the length from 100 to 120. Okay, now time for another modifier, and I'm going to add an array modifier again, and for this one I'll set the default the x value here from 1 to 0, and I'll set the z value from 0 to 1, and I'll increase the count to 3. Okay, now you can see how it looks after the bottom here, the array modifier, and as you can see the array modifier creates clones that are that looks exactly like one another. So in order to break that uniformity here, we'll add another build modifier, and again click randomize, and for this one I'm going to set the length from 100 to 250. By increasing the length value here, we're telling Blender that we want to build our object in a bigger time frame. So at frame 60, you can see we're at frame 60 now, our mesh will use less vertices, less faces. You can play with this value. You can set it to 400 for even less vertices here for our mesh. So I'm setting it back to 250. Okay, I think it's pretty good at about here, and time to add another modifier, and I'll click here, add modifier, and add a bevel modifier for my mesh here, and I'll just zoom in a bit so you can see, and I really hope you can see it. You can see that the bevel modifier here creates this nice cuts, these nice bevels here, and I think it looks pretty interesting. So I'm leaving the bevel modifier as it is. I won't be changing the settings, and I'm now going to add another modifier, and it's going to be a Solidify modifier. And I'm adding the Solidify modifier because I want to add some thickness here to my mesh, and I hope again that you can see it. And I'll just change the thickness value here from 0.01 to 0.03. Okay, and you can see now that my mesh has some thickness. Okay, pretty interesting again, and I think it's time for my final modifier, and I'm going to add a Solidify modifier. Oh, excuse me, I've added the Solidify. I'm just going to add a cast modifier under the deform here, and I'll hit 7 on my mirror keypad to switch to top auto view, and the cast modifier is being pretty crazy right here. Let's help it deform our mesh here the way we want it to. I'll hit Shift A to add an empty, and I'll hit Z to grab my empty and move it, and I'm going to use this empty here as a, you'll see, we'll use it with the cast modifier. I'm going to use it as a guide for the cast modifier here. Alright, I placed my empty here, and selecting again my mesh, and time to edit the cast modifier here. I'll change the factor to minus 0.5 because we want our mesh to be pulled in instead of blowed up, And of course I'm going to change the control object. Click here and select the empty. Okay, so you see how it looks here, and I've added the cast modifier pretty much because the cube is a very uniform object, and I wanted it for this one to be stretched and all, but since part of the challenge was not to alter our objects in edit mode, I thought that the cast modifier would add some extra variation for our scene here. Okay, now I'm going to change the Blender render setting here to cyclist render, and I'll hit 7 on my main keypad to switch to top author view, and I'll hit Shift A to add mesh a plane, and I'll hit S to scale my plane. You can't see right now, it's pretty small, and I'm going to scale it up at about here. Okay, and I'll hit G and Y to move it on the Y axis, and G and X and move it on the X axis a bit. Okay, and 1 on my main keypad to switch to front author view, and G and Z to move it on the Z axis. And as you can pretty much realize, this will be used as a light for our scene. Okay, it's nice about here. I'll change some options here for my plane, and what I'm going to do is change the ray visibility here, and I don't want this object to be seen by my camera, so I'll deselect this one, and the plane now will of course illuminate our scene, but it won't be visible through our camera. And talking about the camera, I'm moving here and left clicking my camera to select it, and I'll just input some values here for my scene. I'll set the X to -7, the Y to -30, and the Z to -1, and I'll also change the rotation here. I'll set the X to 104, the Y to 12, and the Z to -10. Alright, now moving to the camera object properties panel here, and I'll just bring the focal length down from 35 to 20, and I'll also add some depth of field for my scene here. So I'll increase the distance. Let's first of all click limits so we can see the place of the focus here, and I'll increase the distance and set it. You can see this little yellow cross here, and I'll set it, let's say, to 29. So I want my focus point to be in here. Okay, now it's pretty nice. Time to add our depth of field effect here, and I'll change the size to 0.22. Okay, and I'll increase the blades number from 0 to 5. Okay, I think we're done with our camera here. And one final thing, I'm going to right click my mesh here to select it, and I'll hit the tab key to switch to edit mode. Maybe I'll have to wait a bit, and I'm hoping that Blender won't crash. Okay, and you can clearly see we only got one cube here, and I'm going to add a material to my cube. I'm clicking new to assign a new material to my cube here, and waiting for Blender to respond. Okay, the surface is set to diffuse BSDF. I'll change the color, make it a strong orange here, and I'll hit Ctrl Tab here to change the mesh select mode from vertex to face. I'll select this face right here, and I'll add another material for my mesh here. Click new, wait for the new material to appear, and again Blender is working pretty slow now, and I'll just click assign because I want this second material, the diffuse BSDF, the white one, to be assigned on this face only. Okay, I'll click assign, and I have to wait a bit again. Okay, now I'm hitting tab key to switch from edit to object mode, and just so I can see how it looks in my viewport, I'm moving to the first material here, and let's change the names. This one is the first material, and this one is the second material. And for the first one, I'll click right here and expand the settings, and I'll click on the viewport color and select the sampler here, and I'll just click in the diffuse color here so we can see how it all looks in our viewport. Now I'm hitting 0 on my numeric keypad to switch to camera perspective view, and our scene is pretty much ready. I've also added some compositing nodes for this one, but the actual interest here is to see how the modifiers work to create our little scene right here. And moving to the render settings, I'll just increase the integrator samples here just to render an image for you to see. I'll set it to 300, and I'll also change the preset to full global illumination. Okay, I'll also change the resolution here to 1280 and 720, increase it to 100%, and let's render an image to see how it looks. And we can't see anything because we haven't set our plane here to be a light, a light emitting object, and right clicking the plane to select it and moving to the materials panel here, and I'll click new, and I'll set this material to be emit, and of course set the surface to emission, and let's render now. And of course we can increase the emission value, although I think it looks pretty nice right now, but let's increase the emission value a bit. For our material, for our plane here, I'll set the strength to 2 and hit F12 to render again. I'm hitting Control up to see the rendering full screen. And you can see how it looks. We have the depth of field here creating an interesting result. We have the front part of our mesh here in focus, and we have the part out of focus, the part that is further away from the camera. I think it looks pretty interesting. You can of course increase the emit option for the plane to have more light, or increase the plane size to create an object that emits more light for cyclist render. I think it looks pretty interesting. I really hope you like my submission to the BlenderDiplom challenge, pretty nice challenge, and good luck to all of those who take place. So this is it, and thanks for watching.